I'll now move on to pluralism. Pluralism, then, the Aga Khan's ideas of pluralism will very much be rooted, as you'll see, based on this inseparability of faith and world in his interpretation of faith. Nevertheless, just as some thinkers have noted this issue of, in public discourse, should a certain idea only be crafted in theological language? And what you'll find is that the Aga Khan's justification for pluralism will have two aspects. There'll be a justification, an argument based on the state of the world, based on culture or politics, and there'll also be a theological argument. So, firstly, what is pluralism? This is probably the best definition of pluralism that you find in the Aga Khan's speeches. And as I go through this, although I'm giving an interpretation of the Aga Khan's views, I am simultaneously reconstructing his ideas from many, many speeches that he's given systematically. So just bear that in mind. There are other ways to sort of cut the cake, as it were. So for the Aga Khan, pluralism means not just accepting but embracing human difference. It sees the world's variety as a blessing rather than a burden. It does not mean homogenization. So it does not mean upholding one principle of human commonality and zeroing out everything else. It actually is difference affirming, his vision of pluralism. So as he says, it respects the role of individual identity. It affirms individual identity, and it simply means reconciling what is unique in our individual traditions with a profound sense of what connects us all. Now, what's important is how the Aga Khan's vision here is informed. First, it's informed by the efforts of the AKDN. The Aga Khan stresses that you cannot eradicate poverty without having pluralism, that the two are absolutely intertwined. And at a practical level, you can see how if you go into a society with economic instability and you want to empower people to lift themselves out of that state, groups of different languages, religions, ethnicities are going to have to work together without zeroing out their disagreements. So that's one perspective. The second perspective, which is a very interesting perspective that the Aga Khan brings to this issue, is that he sees pluralism as the only viable antidote to the two forces of globalization, which risks homogenizing various human cultures across the world, and the counter to globalization, which is tribalism, where individuals, societies, ethnic groups, religious groups feeling under threat try to normatize everything around them by defining their own culture or worldview by what they're against. And pluralism for the Aga Khan is the only sort of remedy to counteract those situations. Now, at the same time, there is a theological argument made for pluralism, and I'll go through it very briefly. So I've found three theological bases for this notion of pluralism from an Islamic perspective. Number one, the diversity of the universe, including human beings, is actually a reflection of divine plenitude. We find this in many speeches of the Aga Khan, where he says homogenization is a danger, first of all, because the very diversity of creation is a divine gift. So there's an ontological basis to pluralism. Secondly, human beings can attain self-knowledge and spiritual growth through learning about diversity. In the Islamic tradition, as you have in many other traditions, there's this famous saying, "He who knows himself knows his Lord." This goes back to the Prophet Muhammad, and you find it even in the Greek traditions. And from this quote of the Aga Khan, where he says, pluralism is a blessing to help enrich self-knowledge, it means there's a spiritual value in diversity, that human beings can approach that mystical knowledge of their own selfhood by studying the differences that they have amongst each other. So that's a very deep Gnostic notion behind pluralism. And a third reason, of course, is to give absolute value to one's opinions, ideas, and worldviews is actually a way of playing God. Because in this theology, God alone is the absolute. God alone is the ultimate reality, or the mono-reality, and all other realities are relative realities. So therefore, the proper response to what I earlier referred to as the all-enveloping divine presence can only be humility and a sense of one's creaturehood, and pluralism grows out of that. I won't go through this too much, but I just want to point out, and we can talk about this in the Q&A if you want, in Ismaili Islam, there is a very long history of a theology that affirms pluralism. This is all from the past, but I'll return to this slide. I'm simply pointing out the Quran itself never defines salvation in terms of one religious group being saved and everyone else being condemned.